listen because my wife's just distracting because I'm laughing at her, I think.
Any of you? We can't have peripheral distractions going on. I mean, what's going on here? This is studio time. This is kind of where it's at.
I should have an office.
You should. Absolutely. It's about time you had some garden room or something of that nature, Jamie, just so you can do this. You know what I mean?
But as in season 2, I would say we're probably more like season 4. I think we're in Stranger Things territories now. I think we're like coming to a peak.
I think you have to have had more than about 8 people watch it though, in order to get to that kind of level. I'm sure it's just us 3 watching it over and over again when we look at that. I'm sure that's all it is. But how handsome do we look, and how absolutely cool are we? Now, Jamie, I spot here that you might not have a beer.
You're dead right.
But it's beers and ideas. We had George. I was just reminiscing to myself, like you do, the earlier today, and I remember the time George came on Beers and Ideas, and he was drinking water. And here's you now drinking wine.
Because of the reason for that. Because it's wine and wines. So we're gonna have a good wine while drinking wine. Wine and wines. Cue the music.
I've created the new titles now. You can't go changing what the thing is.
I'm being a bit diverse. I'm being a bit diverse. There's a link to that which I'll bring in later on.
All right. Okay. Very good. Very good. We're going to. What we're doing here is, just so you know, is we're recording two together. So we'll probably keep in the second one. We'll keep talking about things from the first one, and there'll be continuity errors everywhere. But we're just going.
I don't have to change my shirt.
No, I think we'll just go with the same shirt. I mean, I've only got black t-shirts, so it won't make any difference to me. This is all I have, so just the one. That's why it's a
very slimming, though, I must say, Stephen, lately. Very slimming.
Jamie, that's
have you lost weight lately?
I have lost weight, and you can find out about my weight loss at wasteland.substack.com. Wasteland, it's clever this. Wasteland spelled W-A-I-S-T. Wasteland. See what I did there?
Oh, I didn't notice that.
That's clever. That's clever.
Well, it's not really because you didn't really kind of explain that to the dyslexics. I feel outcast because of my disability.
Oh.
Can you sort that out, please?
I'm sorry about that. I'll put some sort of disclaimer at the start of .substack.com. Anyway, I'm. What sort of wine are you drinking, Jamie?
It's a red.
I need more than that.
Well,
it's a red.
Can we just say it's a red wine and then move on?
Because is it a Shiraz or is it a Cab Sav or is it a?
You know the cheapy Blossom Hill that's got everything mixed in, all the slop from the bottom of the buckets. It's that one. No, I like it.
Of course, Blossom Hill, please don't sue us as a consequence of it. And just to be clear, neither me nor George said that. It was Jamie that said that.
Well, it's £5 and it's really nice. So I'm advertising it.
£5? So. I've never spent £5 on a bottle of wine.
No way. How much do you normally spend on a bottle of wine, Stephen?
$3.99.
Oh.
Wow. Mind you, I did shop at Lidl. And there's not a lot at Lidl costs more than $3.99, to be fair. George, what are you drinking?
Boring. Budweiser.
Ah, you like a Bud, don't you?
Bud.
You drank Budweiser before.
I think I have.
What's the advert with the frogs? Could we replicate it? Let's start that. Bud.
Why?
So, is that it?
Wow.
Is that it? I have no idea. See, I don't know. I have no idea, Jamie, what you're on about there, because I'm not a victim of the capitalist state that is the world of advertising.
Well,
you've avoided it.
Stephen, you don't know what a segue you just made there.
Really? I'll quickly introduce my beer. I'm on the alcohol-free.
Get in.
Elvis. Brewdog Elvis.
What does the AF stand for?
Alcohol-free.
Ah, it meant as.
That's what I thought it meant. Then suddenly the penny dropped that it was alcohol-free.
Makes more sense, doesn't it?
It does, than the other, yeah. But,
Elvis has. You have to edit that bit out.
I'll have to tick the box now that says there's swearing and I'll put it up on Spotify and we'll be hounded out to Spotify or whatever. So, right, well, I'll take you back, George, to my statement about Jamie being enmeshed in the capitalist infrastructure, because you seem to think that might link us nicely into our philosophical or sociological or whatever idea you've got, because I just want to say first of all that me and Jamie have no idea what George is about to say. I'd like to tell you that this is rehearsed, skillfully rehearsed, so we know what we're going to say, but we have no idea what George is about to say. So go for it.
Guys,
go for it.
I'm not going to look at Jamie while I'm doing my introduction, because that's where. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about Adorno, Theodore Adorno.
Oh yeah.
Critical Marxist from the Frankfurt School, a contemporary of two people I've already talked about, Karl Popper, Ludwig Wittgenstein. So he's in that sort of time period, born the start of the 20th century. So his thinking comes out of Marxism, and basically after the Second World War and communism started to unravel, he critically looks back in history as Marx did, but he takes forward that experiment's failure and how he looks at it. And we're going to get through a little introduction to his philosophy and allow it to land at this concept of the Yale lock. So you're just going to have to bear with us as we get there. But I think why I've picked Adorno is I think there's a lot of complicated philosophy that's way above me, but I think there's some good little snippets that, particularly for social workers, are quite useful. So let's have a go. Okay. So one of Adorno's big ideas was found in his book Negative Dialectics. Who Marx had Engels, they wrote together. Adorno had a fella called Horkheimer, and they wrote this book together. And their big concept was the Enlightenment, or man's progress, was always trapped between not like good and evil, but good and bad. So man in the wilderness, first he conquers nature, then at some point man creates technology, then he uses technology to subvert other men, to have control over other people. But if we think of modern times, like we smashed the atom and we invented the atomic bomb before we invented the nuclear reactor to give everyone free electricity. Just as we've sort of conquered nature, we've killed loads of animals. Do you see what I mean? We've not used it for good, and it's sort of like a tendency. It's no one's will to do it, but this is just how man's progress unfolds. It just see what I mean? If you're with us so far, so basically, man's progress is always in this sort of duality. So that there's the prospect of good, but it always seems to fall away to bad. And the grand experiment is socialism, Marxism writ large, ended terrible failure, the murder of millions, and it didn't materialize, didn't work. And there's vast ways of discussion of why that happened, but it's this progress has this duality. So really, we should have been the world should have been fed, everyone should have been clothed, that all should have happened, but all ended up with wars and fighting and starvation and these things. And he thinks now the Enlightenment, or man's progress, is so complete that we're all trapped in it, that now we're on YouTube, podcast, Spotify, we're so trapped in it, we can't even criticize it anymore. So he calls it the Archimedean. There's no Archimedean position. Archimedes with the big lever to lift the moon up. We can't do that anymore because we're completely enmeshed in media, in the game. It's like the Matrix. We can't critically do what we're doing now, if you see it, so to speak.
Can you explain that lifting the moon up with the lever? Because I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so it's a bit like the unmoved mover. So like God's not affected by anybody. He knocks the first dice down and everything happens, evolution happens, everything goes through. And the moon thing is give me a lever long enough and I'll lift the moon. So there's like no gravity. It's just a guy pulling on the moon. There's nothing affecting him, if you see what I mean. So it's like the God's eye view. That's probably the simplest way. So we can't do that anymore.
I think what you just said there. Sorry, I know we've interrupted you. We haven't got the Yale out yet, but what you just said there, but was like I think I think I'm getting this right. We've developed to such a point that we can't develop anymore. I think that's kind of what you said, and we're now trapped in our completeness. That actually, when you said that, my mind just went.
Yeah, well,
because it was like the penny dropped. It was like, yes, absolutely.
And what he sees this process at is that man hates chaos. So when they're in the cave, it's the wild animal jumping out the cave. It's unpredictable weather. So that's why I've invented science. You see what I mean? That's why we've beast to burden. That's why we've got into that game to control chaos. And the capitalist society, and this is where we're getting on to social work a little bit, is we need to control the chaotic elements in the world. And one way that science does that is creating a number out of the chaos. So how many care plans, how many missing periods, how many times the person with dementia leave the house, what medication on, how many milligrams. It's this world of numbers, and it can't now escape just getting more and more involved in that world, because that's the game. There's no out. And he calls this whole thing writ large the culture industry. So it's music, it's TV, it's films, it's newspapers. And again, it's no one's planning this. There's no lizard in the sky pulling the strings, but all it does is dull with senses, dull with critical senses, to say, well, this isn't right. My life really isn't working out for me how I wanted to do. But all we do is we just accept banality. We just accept how things are. And he's really big into culture. Has been the big driver for that. Famously called Walt Disney the most evil man in the world.
Wow.
So above him, like, to be fair.
It's marginal, but yeah. Aye.
So where we're getting to the Yale lock, we're finally there. I think we could make that leap now. Is
you think?
Okay, Jamie. Okay.
I'm still trying to leave at the moon.
Yeah. So
The Yale lock.
The Yale lock. What capitalism does is it makes we think we're all making individual choices that are exactly right for us, but all it's really done is made cheap little changes to something to entice you in, and we'll go, oh, well, that's exactly what I wanted. So really, it's not that personalized. It's just an illusion, and we're all as different as Yale locks are different from like a key or something like that. It's all roughly exactly the same.
And we're unlocking it.
Hello.
Oh.
Are you there, George?
Hello. Come in, George. Your time is up.
George is gone.
George is gone.
That was really a really good point. He said he's bit and then left.
He said, absolutely. Where's he gone? We'll deny him admittance now. Look, we'll admit him again. We can hear him. Hello. Are you all right?
I said the screen for me.
We thought you'd actually disappeared into the matrix there. We thought he's gone forever.
No, it's terrifying. Maybe they are listening.
Yeah, maybe they are, and you disappeared there because you've just
unlocked the secret.
You've just what you've done there. I thought was brilliant. You have stepped outside. You're the person who stepped outside of Plato's cave, haven't you? Then came back in and went, "This is what it's like," and I've just gone, "My God, it is like that. That's exactly what it's like." So,
what point did I cut off there?
Oh, we heard
it.
We heard it. We heard it all. We heard it all. So yes, we heard about the idea of that capitalism is selling us kind of small changes or something. I think you said
small changes that we think are like amazing for us. So here, I think this is where we could start thinking about social work. Well, primarily, we hold it up to be a force for good. But we're also in that duality where I didn't talk enough about how it can be force for bad. Really, it like subverting people, taking freedoms away. The stuff we always talk about, but it's an interesting way of looking at it. In the Yale lock thing, individual care plans. I work in a school. Every child's got an individual education plan. do we offer that the level of individualization that we say we do, or is it an illusion? Is it another trick of the capitalist game to say, yeah, we've got all these individualized plans, but it's just a spin. It's just a story that we tell ourselves, when really, because the circumstances we've got, we can sing to the rooftops that it's a good and the right thing for the person, but really we're just putting people in the same pigeonholes and churning out very similar products. If we want to find the social work intervention as a product, a sellable product, that's how we end up. And I think it's a good, whether we agree with his take on philosophy or not, I think it is a good way of looking at it critically. And you can leave it alone, but I think it is a good approach to get into all this.
Interesting fact, that kind of backs some of what you said, because I've been reading something very similar about than this whole thing. Is if you went to university in the time of Isaac Newton, Cambridge or Oxford or Eton or wherever them places on, you either passed or you failed. You either came up with a degree, you didn't come up with a degree. There's no marks, there's no separate marks. And the idea of having marks and kind of dividing something up into a set of like divisional structure only come about in the onset of the Industrial Revolution, and when there was a need to create a labour force. So yes, it's a really interesting point. When you're talking, George, it reminded me of a book I'm reading at the moment called Homo Deus. Stephen, can you remember the name of the author? Because he wrote Homo Sapiens as well.
Is it Yuval?
That will flash on the screen about now.
Is it Yuval Harari? Is that it?
Something like that, yeah. But he talks about exactly the same thing, which is quite spooky. Because I'm in the middle of reading this book, and you're mentioning the same things about our involvement with numbers and with figures and with facts and stuff like that. So it's and where humans are going, and that whole concept of capitalism, and where do we sit in that, and where's it taking us as a race, and what do we accept and what don't we? It's kind of stuff he's talking about. Unfortunately, I'm only halfway through, so I can't offer his conclusions. But yeah, it must be getting thought about in wider circles. And
it is Yuval Harari. That's who it is. I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah, I think your point about care plans, George, is I think they're all. I think we think they're all individualized. That's the point, don't we? We write an individualized care plan, but because we're only picking from a range of services, then we can only pick a certain amount of things, can't we? And I suppose the human condition that social work tries to support and help is kind of clinically focused on the same sorts of things, isn't it? It's kind of like, for me, working with older people, we were focused on getting people ready, getting people fed, getting people to places. And I think we still do all of those things, because I think there's an assumption that those are the things that are important. And even though we talk about personalization and we talk about what do you want to do, I think if somebody said to us, I want to sit in my pajamas all day and not go anywhere, we'd probably think, oh, your mental health's poor. You're not motivated to do things. We would see it. We would see a particular worldview that I think capitalism gives us, and we would impose that worldview on the individual and see them as somehow flawed if they weren't saying all the things that we would anticipate they would say. Of course you want to go to somewhere and be connected with people. I remember going into care homes and reviewing people's care, and the staff, the well-meaning staff in the care homes, would be saying, oh, she never comes out of our room, she doesn't want to socialize with other people. And I kind of wanted to say, that'll be me. Because if you want to make me leave my room and go and sit with all the folks in the the communal space, I won't want to do that. And I think capitalism drives us to a particular way of being as consumers. We need to be connected. We need to be engaged in particular ways in the world, because if we engage in the world in a particular way, we can then buy the commodities that people, these places kind of produce for us to purchase. I don't know whether I've gone off piece there.
No.
I think you're right. And I think we can go a little bit further and a little bit deeper into that. I think if we have a look at Maslow's pyramid of needs, I'm sure there's maybe an image of Maslow's pyramid will flash to the screen right
Do that.
But it's social work, especially if we go back pre-Care Act, and we were focused on fair access to care, and we had eligibility criteria. So it was like critical, substantial, and moderate, and low, if our memory serves me right. And we're back some years, so I may be a bit rusty on that one. And we looked at substantial and critical needs, and if you applied that to Maslow's pyramid of need, it was on the more basic levels, the more humanistic levels of what we needed to live.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of focused on that, and there was less focus on those higher needs, than
aspirational.
Yeah, the more aspirational. Thanks, George. And so there was less of that, and then the Care Act come along and offered with a wellbeing principle, and which offered with a whole wide range of aspirational care plans that we could aim for. However, but the vast reality, because of capitalism and because of market forces and the lack of resources financially and people on the ground to do this, we're still looking at meeting people's only very, very basic needs, and that concept of self-actualization just doesn't come into it. It doesn't come into a care plan because we don't have the resources to do that. But what's interesting is what type of social worker you are, or what team do you work for? Because I think that changes if you work with elderly people, if you work with people with learning disabilities, if you work with children. There's a different level on that need on that pyramid, in which society deems this to be acceptable. So I think it's acceptable that everyone's basic needs get met, but yet we don't see the same kind of resources ploughed are given to those people who are anyway, showing the dog, given to those people who are younger than they do when we're older. So I don't know if that kind of reflects on an age of society that we have, in a very children-centric society that will possibly have been developing over many years and continue to develop.
Is it George? Is it those parallels that we talked about there in adult care? Is that the same in kind of children's services? Do you think care plans are alluded to have been very child-centered, but actually they come up with similar solutions around parenting and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it is the same story, and I don't think I have any intelligent to add upon what you've said in the children's world. But I think my mind went to the new social worker and this sort of entering the job or entering to studying. I think one lesson from Adorno would be you've got to be mindful that if this duality, that whilst there is the prospect of, like Jamie's point about the hierarchy of needs, of hitting some of those life-changing stuff, or really improving someone's life or changing their perspective on things, you're paid by, you're run by your care plans. The sort of edifice bit is the sort of not drudgery. It's the machine, isn't it? Mm. So if you're not aware, but I think if you just engage with the bottom bit, I don't think you're doing right by being a social worker. And if you just think you're doing the top bit and you're not part of the bottom bit, I think you're telling yourself a lie. I think you've got to hold these two things, and that's a realistic position. Yeah. So I think that's a sort of real lesson by looking at it this way.
Yeah. So just picking up on the Maslow's thing, I want us to flip Maslow's hierarchy, and while so the caveat to this is there are some people who simply because of their disability or whatever or their capabilities can't do particular things. Yeah, I get that. Some people just can't physically dress themselves or physically move about or whatever. I get that, but I think in terms of a whole other set of people who maybe come to social services, social work, if you flip Maslow's triangle and start with love and belonging and safety and self-actualization, they will meet their lower level needs, those physiological needs, they will meet them themselves. I think maybe in mental health services, for example, I don't know, if people aren't taking care of themselves, taking care of them in that paternalistic way, it probably doesn't get us anywhere. But actually working on their sense of belonging and community and who they are and their purpose in life. If once you've got that and you're rooted in that, we will start to do those kind of things like, eat well and get dressed on a morning and all those kind of things. I don't know, that makes sense.
Can I offer a bit of diversity, as I mentioned earlier on, to this conversation? Because my daughter works in a care home and she may be offer. She's been listening in. Do you want to join me, Freya? Offer some. I think you do. Come and join in, and then and if something comes to you, you can
come and pitch.
You can jump in.
Freya.
This is Freya. Can you join? You need to be on there.
Oh. There she is. Hello.
Hello.
So this is my.
Have you got a beer?
Do you want to go and get some rosé wine? Go and get some rosé wine.
Come back with a beer and an idea. They're the two things crucial to the show.
Hey, we can't get wrong for not being diverse now.
No.
Absolutely. I'll tell you one thing while Freya's coming back. One thing that I've read recently, and I can't for the life of me now think where it was, and it kind of fits with what you were saying before, is, and I've tried to remember it as it was, and I don't think I've got this quite right, but it's our capabilities now are outstripping our ability to predict the consequences of the changes we initiate in the world. We're so capable that we can do things, but we are not capable enough to spot the consequences. So now we're just doing things, bit like the government at the minute. I think. Do you not think the government at the minute are just doing things because it sounds like right things to do if you're coming at it from a particular way, but they've got no idea what the consequences are. It's in the butterfly effect, isn't it? They say one thing about.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Stephen, but I'm going to have to disagree. I've been watching the news. I'm thinking, and I knew we were going to come and discuss social work issues. But I'm really kind of quite obviously worried, for the wrong word, about me job and the profession. It's because is social work going to be needed now? Because poverty is going to be wiped out after that. After that mini budget,
there's going to be no poverty. There's going to be no poverty.
Because what I've done after
Jamie, you're being facetious there. You're all being facetious there and making a humorous aside.
I've given everything I've got to the guy with the biggest house in this area, and I'm just sitting back now and waiting for the big bucks to roll in, and I won't be loaded, mate. Because that's what you do. You give everything to the rich people, and then it comes back to you 10 times more. So do we need social work? Is that?
I don't think for a minute you believe anything that's currently dribbling out of your mouth.
Well, any other episode of Beers and Ideas will know fine well. I've been seething, absolutely seething.
Freya.
Yes.
What do you think of capitalism? Good thing or bad thing?
What do I think about capitalism?
Yeah.
Oh, we've got 3 hours now. That's the wrong question.
Should we just be able to buy stuff and fill our houses with loads of stuff because stuff's going to make us happy?
I am a fan of stuff, personally.
Okay.
But I think I'm very much a product of the society that I live in, and don't take any accountability for that.
What's your view on capitalism, Freya?
My view on capitalism.
She loves it.
I'm not a fan.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of capitalism. I'm almost communist. I probably am a communist, actually.
Oh, you must be so proud, Jamie. You must be so proud.
I am such a the old block.
Right.
So yeah, so I think
I don't know where to go with that other than bring a red flag on the screen at this point or something like that. Yeah.
But I think we can't deny the benefits of what capitalism have brought with. But I think it's that duality thing. I think it goes back to George's point, isn't it? Is that we're struggling with these two concepts, aren't we, of socialism in a capitalist world, because capitalism has brought us so many good things. And like I say, perhaps seeing there thinking what. But it has, and we at the cost. I get the cost of to other people, but capitalism has brought some good things, and it's allowed it to offer the care to people who are extremely vulnerable, who wouldn't have had that and don't have that in other societies around the world. But we're torn against that because of that moral dilemma that capitalism brings with us. Often it comes at the expense of of somewhere else. Well, richness comes from it comes from, you know, places in third world countries that have been exploited and are continue to be exploited. So that's a juggling that George you were talking about at the very beginning, isn't it? It's like you've got two opposing ideas in one hand. In is the struggle for us is where do we sit with it? And that's what's Freya made that excellent point, isn't it? It's like they are like having stuff, and we all disagree with how Amazon's taken over everything, but we all buy from it, and it's that conflict within
it. And what Adorno argument he would make is Freya's communist revolution, her likelihood of causing a revolution is subdued by all the stuff.
Yeah.
So she's aware of the trade-off, and she's like, I quite like all this stuff. I'm not gonna go to the Houses of Parliament and attack them all. I'm just gonna stay listening to music, watching Netflix and all this. So the capitalist it change it in.
Do you not think that if people weren't, young people in particular, weren't so disenfranchised with politics and with a feeling of power of the people and of individual responsibility, there would be a bit more, especially at the minute. No one's happy with the political system that we've got at the minute, but people feel quite powerless against it. So would you rather waste your time going out and, well, what I would think you would be wasting your time going out and trying to make some small change, or you could sit at home and watch Netflix and pretend just apathy is often better?
Well, that's exactly right. I can't argue with that one word. But when all this philosophy was done in Western Europe, there's revolutions, government falling, kings were getting assassinated. It was all up. Yeah, we've had a change of prime minister, change of monarch, not a whisper. One person got shouted in the crowd. That was it. That's the level. We just go with it now. And whether we think it or not, Adorno's argument is all the capitalist products, the songs on the radio, the Coronation Street, has an effect of subduing it down.
Is it not going back to the point you mentioned earlier on about Karl Marx? Is when Karl Marx turned around and talked about the opiate, the people being religion? Is capitalism not the opiate of people now?
Absolutely, capitalism is a new religion, isn't it? Definitely, it's the religion we all buy into. Even if you know when people would say back in the day, people would say I'm a Christian even if they didn't go to church. You know what I mean? Now we say we don't like capitalism, but we still do all the things associated with capitalism. You know what I mean? Like you would still have, like 40 years ago, you would have ticked the Christian box on the census, even if you'd never stepped inside the church for the year. You would have done that. Now, I think all four of us sat here would probably all go, yeah, capitalism is largely not a force for good, and it's probably creating the mental health crisis that we currently see. Because my worry is always not us, but the people who live in this capitalist world who can't afford all the things that we can afford. Because we compared to people what even only 100 years ago, we have luxury beyond measure, don't we? You know, us sat here. And for us, as the social work angle is, what about all of those people who look at us coming into their houses as social workers, going, I've got none of that though. I can't even put my heating on. I can't even feed me kids, or I feed me kids and I don't eat. You know, so we would tick the capitalist box, wouldn't we? Even though we don't want to be part of it, because the point of the philosopher is that we're trapped.
I think that's an interesting point, comparing capitalism with Christianity, because I think the way that Christianity was used was very much to control and as a power and as a higher someone's watching, you have to follow and obey the rules that, and obviously as now we're less religious as a society, that sort of come in terms with the rise of capitalism. And I think that's interesting with you saying people that that's like people that service users that would think that they don't have these things are often seen as see themselves as outcasts to society, because they are not able to fit into this capitalist
ideal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think outcast is a really interesting word and probably highly appropriate to use about people in that position. I don't know whether you saw Newsnight on Friday night. The guy that I follow on Twitter called Single Dad Social Worker, I think he's called. He was on. He's just qualified as a social worker, just about to start his first job, and he was talking about food poverty, fuel poverty. He's been doing this now for a number of years, and he was using kind of, not terms like that, but similar ideas. That we're not even at the bottom of the. This is not what he was saying, but this is what was going on in my head. People living in poverty are not even at the bottom of the pile. They're not even in the pile. And he was saying the idea that we've got this current crisis going on at the minute. People in poverty have been living in that crisis long before calling it what we call it now was fashionable to the position that we're in. So I think that outcast word really resonates with me, that these people who we're working with are outcasts in society. I
think it raises an interesting point, doesn't it? Because we're talking about poverty and we're talking inequality, but I think we need to have think about, because we'll see it on the telly, we'll see it on Facebook, where people kind of make judgments about people who are living in impoverished conditions when they've got big tellies and all that type of stuff. But I think the biggest problem that capitalism causes is inequality. And what we've found is the greater levels of inequality sees the greater levels of social problems. And that's in, and I want to flash up, Stephen, for us, is in the inner level. The same guys who wrote the spirit level, inner level, and they talk inequality and how that affects the individual perceptions and creates problems where you perhaps may need social workers for. So I don't think it's just an issue of poverty. I think it's an issue of inequality. And I was talking to somebody today about inequality, and it was my sister actually talking about inequality, and she was making some comparisons to the 80s, which she couldn't quite remember, and how people were quite impoverished in the 80s. I said, but the difference was inequality wasn't as great as it is now. So that's why we're seeing a rise and a spike in social problems, is because the inequality is far, far greater in places like USA, the UK, and Portugal. So we're seeing that those greater levels of inequality, which is driving up higher levels of social problems. Where if you go to places where there's a lot more poverty within society, but it's a lot more of an equal society, you aren't seeing the same social problems, which is surprising. And I think what it shows is that the issues are far more complex than can be solved by Facebook.
I read an interesting study, actually.
You've got the scorers talking now, like I think.
I read an interesting study actually about income inequality in terms of relative income. So I think that surveyed and asked, because they were looking into the effect of relative income in terms of your communities, and they'd asked people. I can't remember, it's just the dogs. I can't remember the exact questions that they asked them, but they'd asked a large sample size whether they would rather have this significantly larger amount of money and everyone around them would have more, a larger, and people chose to have less money if it meant that the people around them had less than them. So it was the quantity of money was irrelevant. It's the social power.
The social
and the relative,
more important.
That
right,
was more.
Yeah, right.
That's at the level.
So relative does that mean relative poverty is
more has more of an impact? Is that what you're saying?
More impact than absolute poverty?
Yeah.
Because I suppose there are countries in the world where people live in absolute poverty, aren't they? Where where they have absolutely no money, whereas in our country people have money.
Yeah, and we don't see. I mean, it might be because there's no services and they pick this stuff up, but we don't get the impression that it's the same mental health problems that we have. People living on rubbish tips in India, and compared to those who is that George gone?
George has gone and come back. He's
compared to those people living on benefits in this country, we're seeing high levels of poverty aren't creating the same amount of mental distress.
Yes.
Based on the way you live, I suppose, and what's going around you.
Where people have actually less money than the poorest in this country have.
Yeah.
It's the difference that causes the mental distress or social distress rather than the.
And I think that's why we have such a problem, is because people can't understand it. It's a complicated concept that I've read quite a few books on the subject, and I still can't get my head around it myself. Because it is so complex, and it's not common sense, is it? So, and I think that's why we have such a disregard. Some people, not us, but some people have such a disregard for people living in poverty, because they can see the differences. What people are living in. Well, what you complain about, you still got to, you can still, prior to this present government, you can still put your heating on, and you can still feed yourself, and you can still. Interesting.
It is interesting. And what the other thing that's really interesting is our efforts to make a 20-minute podcast have failed absolutely miserably as we approach 55 minutes.
Some editing to do, Stephen.
Some editing to do, absolutely. So we normally, I've just remembered that what we normally do at the end of them all is have a little takeaway, not like chips and that. We have a little takeaway from each person. So who wants to go first with a takeaway?
Can I go first?
Yes.
I think it's been, because I wasn't really sure where George was going with this, but it's always brilliant whatever comes out of his mind. But that duality, that struggle, you can take it anywhere, can't you? And that struggle that we have with writing care plans, or we won battles with capitalism and Amazon, or we won battles with levels of poverty within the world, and how we deal with that when we're on heads and come to terms with it. It's always there, isn't it? There's always this balancing act to. Also, there should be some kind of Greek person. Is there a Greek god or a prince or someone who does this balancing thing? Like is this like Sisyphus? What's he called? The guy who pushes the rock up?
Sisyphus.
Yeah, a bit like Sisyphus. Is there equivalent Sisyphus? That's my take anyway.
Somebody balancing things up. I don't know. I suppose the only thing that comes to mind for me as a takeaway is the position we forever end up. We try and consider things as a binary, only to discover that actually, everything's somewhere in the middle, and there are shades of good and bad in everything that we attempt to do, aren't there? That's where I'm kind of get left. But I suppose the other thing that springs to mind is that this idea that people living in poverty observe those who aren't, and therefore must feel that desperately, and then when they can't see a way out, must then be critical of people in positions like us as social workers, for example.
Oh, that's profound, Stephen. That was quite good.
I did think so. I wondered where it was going. It's like being in a lecture there. I thought, God, just keep talking, Stephen. Just keep talking. Something profound will come out your mouth. Who wants to go next, Freya or George?
Go on, Freya.
I don't have much of a takeaway from that. I think abolish overhaul government is mine. And I think I would be a brilliant replacement.
I think you should. We're all going to get behind you as revolutionaries.
As a dictator, you going to be?
I would be a dictator for a short time, and then I would give power back to a community. Dictatorship of the proletariat, as Marx would say, is what I would do.
George, we'll have another scorer come to join. Do you want to come to hello, Colonel?
George, hello. They're all there. They're all there. All the scorers.
Well, not all there.
All the scorers are joining us. George, what's your final takeaway from tonight's epic show?
I just like the duality thing for social work students, that they're working for the man, but they can do a bit of good as well, and just holding that balance. But I'll finish on a little anecdote about Adorno. So his dad was Jewish. He's half Jewish, so he had to leave Germany, like all the other philosophers talk about. Went to Oxford, and then he ended up in California, where basically this guy who criticised the culture industry just hobnobbed his way through all the Hollywood A-listers and went to all the parties and lived a great little life till he died. So there you go. He's a bit of the duality in his own life.
Wow. Great.
Brilliant.
That was
Brilliant.
Beers and Ideas episode, goodness knows what, and ridiculously long as ever. Join us next time for more of this ridiculous banter.